The moonlight painted silver streaks across Naomi Evans' tear-stained face as she hitched up her white wedding gown and ran through the tall prairie grass. Her lungs burned with each desperate breath, the sound of her heartbeat drumming in her ears. Behind her, the distant shouts of angry men and barking dogs grew louder. She couldn't go back, not to him, not to that monster who'd purchased her from her uncle like a prized mare. Texas, 1875. A night that should have ended with celebration instead became Naomi's desperate bid for freedom. "There she is," a voice called out from the darkness. "Get her before she reaches the creek." Naomi's pace quickened, her bare feet bleeding from sharp rocks and thorns, but she felt nothing except the overwhelming need to escape. The wedding dress, once pristine and carefully chosen by her soon-to-be husband, Jeremiah Blackburn, was now torn and mudded, a physical representation of her shattered future. At 20 years old, Naomi had been forced to accept Jeremiah's proposal after her parents' death left her dependent on an uncle who saw her as nothing more than a burden. Jeremiah, a wealthy rancher 30 years her senior, had promised her uncle significant compensation for her hand. She hadn't realized the true nature of the man until earlier that evening, when she'd overheard him speaking to his ranch hands about breaking her in like one of his wild horses. The cruel laughter that followed made her blood run cold. The creek appeared before her, moonlight dancing on its surface. Without hesitation, Naomi plunged into the frigid water, gasping as it soaked through her dress and petticoats, weighing her down. Still, she pressed forward, using the water to mask her scent from the tracking dogs. The sound of hoofbeats approached from her left. Panic surged through her veins as she ducked beneath a willow tree, pressing herself against the muddy bank. "Miss, you all right down there?" The voice was low, gentle, nothing like the harsh tones of Jeremiah or his men. Naomi remained silent, her body trembling. "I ain't with them," the voice continued. "Saw you running from the Blackburn property. That man's got a reputation that ain't worth dirt." Slowly, Naomi peered through the willow branches. Atop a magnificent chestnut stallion sat a tall figure, silhouetted against the night sky. The man wore a wide-brimmed hat, his features obscured by shadow. "Why should I trust you?" Naomi called, her voice barely audible over the rushing water. The man dismounted, keeping a respectful distance. "Name's Dalton Keller. I work cattle on the North Range. Was heading into town when I saw the commotion." He removed his hat, revealing a young face not much older than her own with kind eyes that reflected the moonlight. "I don't make habit of leaving women alone in creeks in the middle of the night." A shout from the distance made them both turn. Jeremiah's men were getting closer. "They'll kill you for helping me," Naomi warned. Dalton replaced his hat. "Well, they're welcome to try." He extended his hand. "But first, they'd have to catch us." Naomi hesitated only briefly before reaching out. His hand was warm, calloused from hard work, and surprisingly gentle as he helped her from the creek. "Can you ride?" he asked, already leading her toward his horse. "Yes." She'd grown up on horseback before being sent to her uncle's home in the city. Dalton lifted her easily onto his stallion, then mounted behind her. "Hold tight, miss. We've got a long night ahead." As they galloped away from the creek, Naomi felt the weight of her doomed marriage lifting. The danger wasn't past, not by far, but for the first time since her parents' death, someone had offered help without asking for anything in return. They rode hard for nearly an hour, following winding trails through dense scrubland that would confuse the tracking dogs. Finally, they stopped at a small clearing, the moon now high overhead. "We should be safe here for a spell," Dalton said, dismounting and helping Naomi down. Her wedding dress was ruined beyond repair, muddy and torn. "Thank you," she said, suddenly aware of how she must look, hair wild, face streaked with tears and dirt, dress destroyed. "I don't know what would have happened if—" "No need to thank me," Dalton interrupted gently. "Any decent man would have done the same." He removed his coat and draped it around her shoulders. "You're shivering. Here." The coat smelled of leather, tobacco, and pine, nothing like the overpowering cologne Jeremiah wore. Naomi pulled it tighter around herself. "I'm Naomi Evans," she offered. "I was supposed to be married tonight." Dalton nodded. To Blackburn, man's known for his cruel streak, treats his horses and wives the same way, breaks their spirit. Wives? Naomi's eyes widened. You'd have been the fourth, the others. Dalton trailed off. Let's just say they didn't fare well. A chill ran down Naomi's spine. My uncle never told me. He just said Jeremiah was wealthy and could provide for me. Some men only see dollar signs, Dalton said, gathering sticks for a small fire. Your feet are bleeding. Let me tend to them before we move on. As Dalton worked, gently cleaning her cuts with water from his canteen and bandaging them with strips torn from his own shirt, Naomi studied him. He couldn't be more than 25, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer sky. Unlike Jeremiah's soft, pampered hands, Dalton's were strong and work-worn. "How far do we need to go?" she asked as he finished wrapping her feet. "Depends on where you're aiming to end up," Dalton replied, sitting back on his heels. Blackburn's influence stretches about 50 miles in every direction. To be truly safe, we'd need to get you beyond that. "I have nowhere to go," Naomi admitted, the reality of her situation hitting her anew. "No family that would take me, no money of my own." Dalton was quiet for a moment. "I've got a small place, nothing fancy, but it's mine, free and clear. There's a town nearby where you might find work. I could take you there." "Why are you helping me?" Naomi asked, searching his face for ulterior motives. "My sister," Dalton said simply. "She was forced to marry a man like Blackburn by the time I found her." He shook his head. "I couldn't help her then, but I can help you now." The sincerity in his voice made Naomi's throat tighten. "I'm sorry about your sister. It was a long time ago." Dalton stood, stamping out their small fire. "We should move on. I don't like staying in one place too long, especially with Blackburn's men out there." They rode through the night, stopping occasionally to rest the horse. Dalton kept them to lesser-known paths, avoiding the main trails where they might be spotted. As they traveled, he shared stories of his life, how he'd worked as a ranch hand since he was 14, saving every penny until he could buy his own small spread 3 years ago. "It's nothing grand," he explained. 20 acres, a small cabin, and a few head of cattle, but it's mine." "It sounds wonderful," Naomi said honestly. After months in her uncle's cold townhouse and the prospect of life in Jeremiah's opulent but prison-like mansion, Dalton's modest homestead sounded like paradise. The eastern sky began to lighten, pink and gold streaking across the horizon. They had reached a high ridge overlooking a vast valley. "We'll rest here for a bit," Dalton said, helping Naomi dismount. Her feet, though bandaged, were still painful and her legs ached from hours of riding. They sat side by side on a fallen log, watching as the sun slowly emerged. Naomi had shed what remained of her veil hours ago, and now she removed the pearl combs from her hair, letting the dark waves fall freely down her back. "You're very beautiful," Dalton said quietly, then immediately looked embarrassed. "I apologize. That was forward of me." Naomi felt a blush warm her cheeks. "No need to apologize for speaking the truth," she said with a small smile. It was the first genuine compliment she'd received in a long time. Jeremiah's comments about her appearance had always felt calculating, as if he were assessing the value of a new acquisition. As the sun rose higher, bathing them in golden light, Naomi realized she felt something she hadn't experienced in months' hope. "We should reach my place by midday," Dalton said, standing and offering his hand to help her up. "You can rest properly there." Just as Naomi reached for his hand, the crack of a rifle split the morning stillness. A bullet splintered the log where they had been sitting moments before. "Down." Dalton shouted, pulling Naomi to the ground and covering her with his body as another shot rang out. "I see them," a voice called from the trees below. "The thief and Blackburn's bride." Dalton drew his revolver. "Stay low," he instructed, his voice calm despite the danger. When I say run, make for the horse. But trust me, Naomi, the way he said her name with such care and urgency made her heart skip. She nodded. Dalton fired twice toward the trees, not aiming to hit anyone but creating enough distraction for their escape. Run. Naomi scrambled to her feet, ignoring the pain as she dashed toward the waiting horse. Dalton was right behind her, firing one more shot before mounting in a fluid motion and pulling her up in front of him. They thundered down the opposite side of the ridge, bullets whistling past them. Dalton kept his body curved protectively around Naomi as they rode, the stallion responding to his every command with incredible speed. That was too close, Dalton said once they were well away from the ridge. They must have picked up our trail. How many were there? Naomi asked, her hands still shaking. 4, maybe 5. Likely part of the search party Blackburn sent out. Dalton's jaw tightened. He won't give up easily. A man like that doesn't accept losing what he considers his property. The way Dalton spat out the word property made Naomi realize how different he was from the other men she'd known, men who viewed women as commodities to be traded, owned, and controlled. They rode harder now, taking even more obscure routes. By mid-morning they reached a small stream where they stopped briefly to rest and water the horse. "You're bleeding," Naomi exclaimed, noticing a dark stain on Dalton's sleeve. He glanced at his arm with mild surprise. "Must have caught a graze, it's nothing." But Naomi was already examining the wound. A bullet had indeed grazed his upper arm, leaving a bloody furrow. "This needs cleaning," she insisted, tearing a strip from the petticoat beneath her ruined wedding dress. As she worked, her fingers gentle but efficient, Dalton watched her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "You're good at this," he observed. "My father was a doctor," Naomi explained, securing the makeshift bandage. "He taught me a few things before he passed." "I'm sorry about your parents," Dalton said. "How long ago?" 8 months, Naomi's throat tightened. "Influenza took them both within a week of each other. My uncle became my guardian, though he made it clear I was an unwelcome burden. When Jeremiah offered to marry me, my uncle accepted without consulting me. And you went along with it." Naomi looked away. "I had no choice, no money, no skills that would earn a living. At least that's what my uncle told me repeatedly." She finished tying off the bandage. "I believed I was doing what my parents would have wanted, making a sensible match. It wasn't until tonight that I learned what kind of man Jeremiah truly is." Dalton's hand covered hers briefly. "You're stronger than you know, Naomi Evans. Not many would have had the courage to run." His words warmed something inside her that had been cold for too long. They remounted and continued their journey, the terrain gradually changing from rugged hills to gentler plains, dotted with cottonwood trees and wild roses. By early afternoon, a small cabin came into view, nestled against a backdrop of pine trees with a clear stream running nearby. A modest barn stood to one side, and a few cattle grazed in a fenced meadow. "It's not much," Dalton said as they approached, "but it's peaceful." To Naomi, it looked like heaven. "It's beautiful," she breathed. Dalton helped her dismount, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. The connection between them was undeniable, now a current of attraction and understanding that had grown stronger with each mile they traveled together. Inside, the cabin was simple but clean, with a stone fireplace, a wooden table with chairs, and a bed in the corner covered with a colorful quilt. Shelves held books more than Naomi would have expected, and handcrafted wooden figurines decorated the mantel. "You can rest here," Dalton said, gesturing to the bed. "I'll tend to the horse and keep watch." "Thank you," Naomi said, suddenly overcome with exhaustion, "for everything." Once alone, she removed the tattered wedding dress, relief flooding through her as she shed the last physical reminder of Jeremiah Blackburn. Wrapped in a blanket, she lay down on Dalton's bed, surrounded by his scent, and fell immediately into a deep sleep. When she woke, the cabin was bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. A dress was laid across the foot of the bed, simple but clean, with a note in strong, angular handwriting. "Belonged to my sister. Hope it fits." The dress was a bit large but wearable with the help of a belt. Naomi found a basin of water and washed away the dirt and tears of the previous night, combing through her tangled hair with her fingers. Outside, she found Dalton chopping wood, his shirt discarded in the summer heat. She paused, watching the play of muscles across his back and shoulders as he worked. When he turned and saw her, his axe mid-swing, he froze. "You look." He began, then cleared his throat. "The dress suits you?" "Thank you for providing it," Naomi said, approaching him. "Though I'm sorry for the circumstances that made it available," Dalton nodded, setting down the axe. "Caroline would have liked you. She had your spirit." The mention of his sister softened the moment between them. "Will you tell me about her?" They sat on the porch steps as Dalton spoke of Caroline, how she'd been vivacious and strong-willed, with dreams of becoming a schoolteacher, before their parents arranged her marriage to a wealthy landowner who turned out to be cruel and abusive. By the time Dalton learned of her suffering, it was too late. She had taken her own life. "That's why I couldn't ride past when I saw you running," he finished, his voice rough with emotion. "I couldn't fail another woman the way I failed her." Without thinking, Naomi reached for his hand. "You didn't fail her, Dalton. The men who treated her as property failed her. The society that gave her no options failed her." His fingers tightened around hers. "Maybe, but I swear to you, Naomi, Blackburn will never hurt you. I'll die before I let that happen." The fierce protectiveness in his voice made her breath catch. "I believe you," she whispered. That evening, Dalton prepared a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and coffee. They ate at his small table, talking easily about their lives, discovering shared interests in books and music. Naomi learned that Dalton had taught himself to read from a discarded primer and had built his collection of books one volume at a time. "My father would have liked you," she told him, smiling at the thought. "He valued education above all else." And what would he think of his daughter running away from her wedding to a wealthy rancher, only to end up in a cowboy's cabin? Dalton asked with a raised eyebrow. Naomi considered this. "He would have wanted me to be safe and happy. Wealth meant little to him compared to character." She met Dalton's gaze. "I think he would approve of my current company far more than my former fiancé." The air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Dalton stood abruptly, clearing their plates. "You should take the bed again tonight. I'll keep watch outside." "You need rest too," Naomi protested. "The floor is fine for me." But Dalton was adamant. "Blackburn's men could still be searching. I won't risk your safety." As darkness fell, Naomi reluctantly took the bed while Dalton settled in a chair by the window, rifle across his lap. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her. The events of the past 24 hours replayed in her mind her desperate escape, the kindness of the stranger who had risked his life for her, and the unexpected feelings blossoming in her heart. Near midnight, a noise outside brought Dalton instantly alert. He moved silently to the door, signaling for Naomi to stay down. She held her breath as he slipped outside, every sense straining for information. Minutes later, he returned. "Just a coyote," he said, but his expression remained troubled. "What is it?" Naomi asked, sitting up in bed. Dalton ran a hand through his hair. "We can't stay here much longer. This is the first place they'll look once they realize I'm involved. Blackburn knows all the local ranchers." "Where can we go?" "I have a friend in Colorado Territory. We worked cattle drives together years back. He'd help us." Dalton sat heavily on the edge of the bed. "But it's a hard journey, especially for a woman. 4, maybe 5 days of riding through rough country." Naomi straightened her shoulders. "I'm stronger than I look, Dalton Keller, and I'd rather face a hard journey than return to Jeremiah." A small smile touched his lips. "I don't doubt your strength for a second, Naomi Evans." His hand found hers in the darkness. "We'll leave at first light." They stayed like that for a long moment, hands clasped, the simple touch communicating more than words could express. Finally, Dalton rose to return to his post by the window. "Dalton," Naomi called softly. When he turned, she said, "Thank you for seeing me, really seeing me. Not as property or a burden, but as a person." His expression softened. From the moment I saw you running through that creek, I saw a woman with extraordinary courage. How could I see anything less? The night passed without further incident, and they rose before dawn to prepare for their journey. Dalton packed efficiently food, ammunition, basic medical supplies, and a change of clothes for them both. "What about your cattle?" Naomi asked as she helped him gather provisions. "My neighbor will tend them. I leave a note whenever I'm away." He hesitated. "Though this time I may not be coming back." The implication wasn't lost on Naomi. "I'm sorry you're losing your home because of me." Dalton shook his head. "A home is just walls and a roof. What matters is who you share it with." His eyes met hers, and the intensity in them made her heart race. "Some things are worth sacrificing for." As the first rays of sunlight breached the horizon, they mounted Dalton's stallion together and set off northward. Naomi wore Caroline's dress with Dalton's spare coat, her hair braided down her back. She felt far removed from the terrified bride who had fled into the night just 2 days ago. They rode steadily through the morning, keeping to less traveled paths. Dalton was a skilled horseman, and under his guidance, Naomi learned to move with the animal rather than against it, making the journey easier on them all. By midday, they had covered significant ground. They stopped to rest in a grove of cottonwood trees beside a clear stream, stretching their legs and sharing a simple meal of jerky and hardtack. "Tell me about Colorado," Naomi said as they sat side by side on a fallen log, much like the one from the ridge. "It's beautiful country," Dalton replied, his face lighting up. "Mountains that touch the sky, forests thick with pine, streams so clear you can count the pebbles 20 feet down. My friend Nate has a place near a small mining town. Not much to look at, but the people there mind their business." A woman with a past isn't unusual. "And what would I do there?" Naomi asked, considering her limited options. "I can't impose on you or your friend forever." Dalton's expression grew serious. "You're not an imposition, Naomi, never think that," he hesitated. "But if you're asking about work, there's always need for women who can read and write. The mine office, perhaps, or the school if they have one." Naomi nodded, contemplating this new future so different from the one that had been planned for her, yet somehow more hopeful. "I could teach." "I always wanted to, like Caroline." Dalton smiled. "You'd make a fine teacher." As they prepared to continue their journey, the distant sound of hoofbeats made them both freeze. Dalton immediately doused their small fire and helped Naomi mount quickly. They rode hard for the cover of denser woods, the sounds of pursuit growing louder behind them. "They're gaining," Naomi called as they thundered through the trees. "Hold tight," Dalton urged the stallion faster, navigating treacherous terrain with remarkable skill. They burst from the woods onto an open plain, completely exposed. In the distance, a plume of dust indicated their pursuers, at least 6 riders, closing rapidly. "We can't outrun them, not with 2 on 1 horse," Dalton said grimly. "What can we do?" Naomi's heart pounded with fear. Dalton spotted a rocky outcropping ahead. "There." He steered the horse toward it, dismounting quickly and helping Naomi down. "Stay behind the rocks, I'll hold them off." "No," Naomi gripped his arm. "They'll kill you." Dalton cupped her face in his hands. "Listen to me. If anything happens, take the horse and keep riding north. Follow the North Star at night. Nate's place is marked on the map in my saddlebag." "I won't leave you," Naomi insisted, tears welling in her eyes. The approaching riders were close enough now to make out individual figures. Leading them was Jeremiah Blackburn himself, his face twisted with rage even at this distance. Dalton pulled Naomi behind the largest boulder, positioning himself with his rifle ready. 6 against 1, he muttered. "I've faced worse odds." "When?" Naomi asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Dalton flashed her a quick grin. "Never," but it sounded reassuring, didn't it? Despite the danger, Naomi found herself smiling back. The riders slowed as they approached the outcropping, spreading out to surround it. Jeremiah's voice rang out, cold and commanding. "I know you're there, Keller. Hand over what's mine and I might let you live." Dalton's jaw tightened. She doesn't belong to you, Blackburn. She never did. The law says otherwise. We were legally married yesterday, Naomi gasped. That's a lie. I ran before the ceremony was completed. He's bluffing, Dalton assured her. Trying to rattle us. Jeremiah's voice came again. One last chance, Keller, send her out or we burn you both out. To emphasize his point, one of his men fired a shot that ricocheted off the rocks above them, sending stone fragments raining down. Dalton returned fire, his shot finding its mark in the shoulder of one of Blackburn's men who fell from his horse with a cry of pain. That's 5, Dalton murmured, reloading quickly. The standoff continued for several tense minutes, shots exchanged sporadically. Dalton was a skilled marksman, keeping Blackburn's men at bay, but they were running low on ammunition. We need a distraction, Naomi said, her mind racing. Her gaze fell on Dalton's coat, which she still wore. I have an idea. She explained quickly, and though Dalton initially protested, he eventually agreed it was their best chance. Carefully, Naomi removed the coat and arranged it over a small rock, positioning it so that from a distance it might look like a person. Ready? Dalton asked, his eyes meeting hers. Naomi nodded, her heart in her throat. On Dalton's signal, Naomi pushed the coat-covered rock into view. Instantly, several shots rang out, hitting the decoy. In the moment of confusion that followed, Dalton fired rapidly at the exposed positions of Blackburn's men while Naomi dashed for the horse, mounting quickly. Dalton backed toward her, still firing, then turned and ran. Naomi reached down and with strength she didn't know she possessed, helped pull him up behind her. They galloped away as bullets kicked up dust around them. Ride east, Dalton shouted, taking the reins. Toward the river, they thundered across the plain, the stallion giving everything it had. Behind them, Blackburn and his remaining men mounted pursuit, but their horses were already winded from the earlier chase. The river appeared ahead wide, deep and fast-flowing. Without hesitation, Dalton urged the horse into the water. The current was strong, but the stallion was powerful, swimming steadily toward the opposite bank. By the time they emerged on the other side, Blackburn's party had reached the riverbank but seemed reluctant to follow. The current was too dangerous for less experienced riders. Jeremiah's voice carried across the water. This isn't over, Keller. I'll find you if it takes the rest of my life. Dalton's only response was to turn his back and lead their horse away from the river into the shelter of the hills beyond. They rode until dusk, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and their pursuers. Finally, they made camp in a protected ravine, the walls high enough to hide the small fire Dalton built. They were both soaked from the river crossing, exhausted and shaken from their close call. That was quick thinking with the coat, Dalton said as they huddled near the fire, trying to dry their clothes. I'm just glad it worked, Naomi replied, her teeth chattering slightly. For a moment I thought we wouldn't make it. Dalton moved closer, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. Blackburn's influence doesn't extend much beyond the territory border. Once we cross into Colorado, we should be safer. Will we reach it tomorrow? Day after, more likely. Dalton hesitated. Naomi, I want you to know that once we reach Colorado, you're under no obligation to stay with me. I promise to get you to safety, and I will. What you do after that is entirely your choice. Naomi turned to face him, suddenly aware of how close they were, his arm still around her. What if my choice is to stay with you? The firelight illuminated the surprise and hope in Dalton's eyes. I'm just a cowboy with little to offer a woman like you. A woman like me, Naomi echoed. You mean one who was nearly forced to marry a cruel man for security, one who had to flee her own wedding? She shook her head. That's not who I am, Dalton, not anymore. Then who are you, Naomi Evans? His voice was soft, his eyes never leaving hers. I'm a woman who wants to choose her own path, who values courage and kindness over wealth and status. She took a deep breath. A woman who's falling in love with the man who rode beside her when she had nothing to offer but trouble. Dalton's hand came up to cup her cheek. You offered me something I thought I'd never find again after Caroline died. Purpose. Hope. His thumb traced her jawline. "I've been falling for you since I saw you standing in that creek, determined to escape no matter the cost." When their lips met, it was gentle at first, a question, an offering. Then it deepened into something more urgent, more profound. Naomi's hands found their way into Dalton's hair, pulling him closer as his arms encircled her waist. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Dalton rested his forehead against hers. "I want to build a life with you, Naomi, not because you need protection or I need redemption, but because I can't imagine my days without you in them." "Yes," she whispered, the simple word containing all her hopes for their future. They slept that night in each other's arms, wrapped in blankets beneath the vast canopy of stars. For the first time since her parents' death, Naomi felt truly safe, not because someone else was providing for her, but because she had found a partner who saw her as an equal. The next 2 days of travel passed without incident. They moved steadily northward, Dalton teaching Naomi about the land, pointing out plants and animals, sharing stories of his years on cattle drives. In turn, she told him about the books she'd read, the places she hoped to see someday, the dreams she'd nearly abandoned. As the sun rose on their 4th day of travel, they crested a hill and saw before them the magnificent Rocky Mountains, their peaks reaching toward the heavens. "Colorado territory," Dalton announced, a smile spreading across his face. "What do you think?" Naomi took in the breathtaking vista, endless forests, meadows dotted with wildflowers, and beyond them, the promise of a new life. "It's more beautiful than I imagined." They rode at a leisurely pace now, the immediate danger behind them. By midday, they approached a small settlement nestled in a valley, no more than 30 buildings clustered around a main street, with scattered homesteads visible on the surrounding hillsides. "Silver Creek," Dalton explained. "Nate's place is just beyond it." As they rode through town, Naomi was struck by how different it felt from the Texas communities she knew. Women moved freely about the streets, some in practical trousers rather than dresses. Children played in front of a small schoolhouse, and the general store's sign advertised books alongside more practical supplies. "It's progressive here," Dalton explained, noting her interest. "The mining companies need educated workers, so they encourage learning. And women have more options, some even own businesses." Naomi's heart lifted at the thought. "It feels like a place where I could belong." They continued past the town, following a winding path up into the foothills. After another hour's ride, a cabin came into view, larger than Dalton's but similarly constructed, with smoke curling from its chimney and a corral of horses nearby. A tall man with a salt and pepper beard emerged as they approached, a shotgun held casually in one hand. Upon recognizing Dalton, his serious expression broke into a wide grin. "Well, I'll be damned. Dalton Keller, is that you?" He propped the shotgun against the porch rail and strode forward as Dalton dismounted. The men embraced like brothers, pounding each other's backs. "Nate," Dalton said warmly. "Good to see you, old friend." Nate's eyes shifted to Naomi, still seated on the horse. "And who's this lovely lady?" Dalton helped Naomi down, his hand lingering at her waist. "Naomi Evans. This is Nathaniel Harper, the finest horseman I've ever known and the most loyal friend a man could ask for." "Miss Evans," Nate said, tipping his hat. "Any friend of Dalton's is welcome here." "Thank you, Mr. Harper," Naomi replied, immediately liking his straightforward manner. Inside Nate's cabin, over coffee and a hearty stew, Dalton explained their situation, Naomi's escape, Blackburn's pursuit, and their journey north. Nate listened intently, his expression growing darker at the mention of Jeremiah's treatment of women. "You're both welcome to stay as long as needed," he said when Dalton finished. "I've got a spare room and there's plenty of work if you're looking to earn your keep." "We appreciate it, Nate," Dalton said, "but we won't impose for long, just until we get our bearings." That evening, after Nate had retired to his room, Dalton and Naomi sat on the porch, watching as the sunset painted the mountains in hues of pink and gold. Their hands were intertwined, a natural connection neither questioned anymore. What happens now? Naomi asked, her head resting on Dalton's shoulder. Whatever we choose, he replied. Nate mentioned the schoolhouse in town needs a teacher, the last one left to get married 2 months ago. Naomi straightened, excitement building within her. Really? Do you think they'd consider me? With your education, absolutely. Dalton squeezed her hand. And I've always been good with horses. Nate says the livery stable is looking for help. We could build a life here, Naomi said softly, the possibility unfurling before her like a flower. Together, Dalton added, turning to face her. In the fading light, his eyes shone with emotion. Naomi Evans, I know we've only known each other a short time, but these past days have been the most alive I've ever felt. I don't have wealth or status to offer, just my heart and hands and whatever future we can build together. Naomi's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of joy. That's all I could ever want, Dalton Keller. When he kissed her this time, it was a promise of partnership, of respect, of a love freely given and chosen. 1 year later, Naomi stood outside the small schoolhouse where she now taught, watching as Dalton approached on horseback. Children's voices called out goodbyes as they raced home after lessons, and Naomi waved to them before turning her full attention to her husband. They had married in Silver Creek just 2 months after arriving, a simple ceremony with Nate as Dalton's best man and the town's dressmaker, who had become Naomi's friend, standing beside her. Together, they had built a small cabin on land adjacent to Nate's, with wide windows that captured the mountain views Naomi had come to love. Word had reached them that Jeremiah Blackburn had eventually given up his search, finding another young woman to marry his 5th wife. Naomi prayed for the woman's safety, but no longer feared her past would find her. As Dalton dismounted and walked toward her, that familiar smile lighting his face, Naomi thought of how far they had come from that desperate midnight escape. She had run from a man who saw her as property and found one who cherished her freedom as much as his own. Ready to go home, Mrs. Keller? Dalton asked, taking her hand and helping her onto his horse. Naomi leaned against him as they rode toward their cabin, where wildflowers grew in abundance and books filled the shelves they had built together. The setting sun bathed them in golden light, just as it had on that first morning when they watched the sunrise after her escape the morning that had truly made her his. I'm already home, she whispered, wherever you are.